What's going on, guys? Today I want to go over paused versus reflexive reps in regards to hypertrophy. So, what's a reflexive rep? A reflexive rep is a repetition typically performed with little to no eccentric control, resulting in a fast impacting drop into the stretch position, followed by an immediate engagement into the concentric portion of the exercise. So, what does this look like? Let's use the dumbbell incline press, for example, like we did last week. So, if I'm here, I start to engage in the descent, and as I come down, typically again there's little to no eccentric control when it comes to a reflexive rep. As I'm coming down, I'm going down to what I perceive to be my full range of motion, if that's the goal, which it typically is with hypertrophy. On the bottom portion of this exercise, I don't pause, I just shoot up immediately. So when we talk about hypertrophy, we always want to engage the most amount of stress to the muscle that we're working. So we want to maximize our range of motion. If you're doing a reflexive rep, meaning you're just coming down quick and going up, you don't really know if here, here, and here was the same every time, because you're not allowing the time to really analyze that process of going down and opening up. You're just letting it go down and go up. So you can see how a reflexive rep in regards to hypertrophy might be a problem. Now, you probably know what a pause rep is, but I'm going to go over a pause rep at a little bit more of an intense definition. So a repetition typically performed with some type of eccentric control. And when I say some type of eccentric control, we're looking at a range between 1 and 8 seconds. 1 second being you have some type of control, but typically more between like the 2 and 8. Anything above 8, you're probably using too light of a weight and you're not really stimulating the muscle to its fullest capability. Now, really quick as well, when we talk about the eccentric control, we're talking about specifically making sure that the muscle that we're working is being affected in the highest way possible with an appropriate amount of weight. So I don't want you to think of the slower I go, the better it is. It's what weight can I find that's going to stimulate the most muscle tissue and not take in other muscles as recruitment, as well as limit joint and fatigue stress. All right. Eccentric control resulting in a slow ease into the stretch position followed by a 1 second minimum, no motion, complete stillness pause before engaging in the concentric portion of the exercise. What do I mean by no motion, complete stillness pause? So we do an exercise, doing a pause rep. A lot of times people will come down, go like this, and then come back up. Now, technically, that's more of a pause than this. But a true pause rep, I'm going to come down as far as I can, typically with more eccentric control. Now I can focus on where that stretch point is, go all the way open, pause for that 1 second, no motion, complete stillness, then come back up. So think about counting 2 Mississippi. All the way down, your first 1 Mississippi is when there's no movement, and then another Mississippi, come back up. All right? It's about making sure that when you're down in that bottom part of the stretch, there's no momentum involved. We're allowing the tissue to stretch fully, and we're allowing for the muscle to work at its fullest capacity through the concentric part of the movement. So why are pause reps more effective than reflexive reps when it comes to hypertrophy? Well, for one, pause reps require less momentum, which means better desired muscle stimulation and recruitment. So when we perform an exercise and our goal is hypertrophy, we are looking to engage the muscle for the entire period of the set with the highest amount of stimulation possible with the one recruited muscle that we're trying to focus on. Momentum takes away from that. We'll use the incline dumbbell press again for an example. If I go down into the stretch portion, and then as I go down, I just reflexively go to push up once I feel in that stretch, that pause, or that lack of pause, I should say, that little bit of a bounce, that bounce is taking away from my chest and allowing for speed and velocity to kind of just take over at that bottom portion, which again, if my goal is to recruit and stimulate the chest, I'm now hindering that by allowing momentum to come through. So you can see how momentum would be a problem when it comes to building hypertrophy and really focusing on the muscle that's trying to build versus bringing the weight from A to B. Second, more equal distribution of stimulus with bilateral movements. So when we perform something like a incline barbell press, as we come down, the distribution of stress in the first rep is pretty consistent, right? As the set goes on and the muscles weaken, one side is going to be a little bit stronger and more stable than the other side. And this means that the other side that's not as strong and stable is going to kind of inflict a left and right pattern that's going to kind of push the stress and allow for the weight to go up, but not because we're performing it the right way, but because our body is using its kind of like fight or flight to just do what it has to do to get the movement up. When you pause, especially when you're all the way down to that stretch position, the stress of that weight evenly distributes across your chest. For that 1 second, everything just kind of opens up and allows for side to side to kind of have that equal opening. And then from there, when you push that concentric portion, it allows for the muscles to work more as one. Versus, again, if you just went down into that stretch position and when you just push up because that area is weak, side to side, right? Another benefit of a pause rep in terms of equal distribution, when you have that pause rep, you're going to know when you're in that pause if that's your last rep or not. When you have a reflexive rep and there's momentum behind it, you might feel like you might be able to get one or two more, and you might get it or you might not, which will fuck your logbook up. But with a pause rep, like, you know if that next one's coming up. There's no if I push more with my heels or do this with this. That's not going to happen. You know from that position how hard that concentric portion was that the next one is not coming up. So again, more of a reason to have that pause in there in regards to equal distribution of stress. Next, pause reps allow for more consistent rep quality. This is very important. Rep quality really is everything when it comes to training, because how you perform your reps literally dictate how your body's going to look. If you have shitty form, no range of motion, no control, can you still build muscle tissue? Yes, because you're technically contracting the muscle. It's going under some type of stress, but it is going to be very, very poor compared to if you use full range of motion, good pauses, good eccentric control. These different variables are something that we want to make sure are consistent in every single rep that we do. So the quality behind our movements and how we can track that, that is something that we can set a standard for every time that we train. So if I'm looking at again, incline dumbbell press, and when I get into the stretch position, I'm pausing for 1, 2. I know that next week if I pause for 1, 2 with a little bit more weight, I know that I've got stronger. It wasn't because I just moved more weight with momentum, right? If I used 100-pound dumbbells this week for 10, next week I used 102s by using those little rogue discs, and I have 102s for 10. Well, I'm stronger. I got stronger. There was some type of adaptation that happened, right? If that pause wasn't there and I just came down and went up, there's a chance that when I came down and I pushed back up reflexively, that my first stretch was here, my second one was here, and then maybe the third one was here, and then as the set got deeper, it kind of raised a little bit, because the more difficult the exercise, the more the body's going to kind of go into this fight or flight of, I just want to get the exercise done with whatever I have to get it done, right? When you have that pause there, we're now opening up every time to that position where we know for a fact that last rep, this is exactly where we were. Where again, we're setting that standard that every single repetition that we do, this variable is behind it. So every single exercise that we're doing, if we have that variable consistent each week, we're making sure that what our progressive overload actually is in our data, in our books, is actually real, because the quality behind that pause ensures that we have that 1 second that's going to be consistent throughout every single rep that we do. Next, we have improved mind-to-muscle connection quality. This kind of goes back to the less momentum thing, but when we perform an exercise, let's again talk about the incline dumbbell press. As we come down into the stretch portion, if I stretch here versus stretching here and pausing for a second, that's going to allow for more muscle fibers to be recruited and be involved. right? If I just come down, it's just say even fully stretched, but I didn't pause, I just shot back up. That transfer of energy when I shoot is taking away from the chest. Again, we're having less desired stimulus because of the momentum, right? But if we come all the way down and have that pause, not only is more muscle fibers exposed, but they're having to be under that load for a longer period of time. So that extra period of time is not only ensuring quality, but it's also ensuring stress under the load. So the mind to muscle connection is enhanced through that pause because we're not allowing any momentum to drive through. Number 5, safer for both uni and bilateral movements, but especially unilateral. Say you're doing, again, the incline barbell press, and we talked about the weakness of one side versus the other. So we're at rep 5 and we need 8 reps, okay? As I'm coming down, I'm doing reflexive reps. So again, the weight's probably going to be typically heavier with a reflexive rep because their weight is significantly reduced, or the reps are significantly reduced when you do a pause rep. But let's just say I'm doing again, a set of 8, right? By rep 5, if I'm doing 8 and it's a reflexive rep with heavier weight, I'm going to feel something of like one side's a little bit more stable than the other. One side's a little bit more power than the other. And as the set goes on to rep 6 and rep 7, it's getting more and more dangerous because the muscle that's weak is showing you that it's weaker by kind of falling down and following behind the other one. And the deeper you get into the set, the more you're exposed to getting injured. So in general, it's safer to have that pause in there because as you get into that position of being fully stretched, again, when you go to push, your chest is going to work more as one versus that fight left and right. And again, when you get into that stretch position, you also have that ability to analyze that 1 second of everything's kind of equal. Also, am I going to be able to make it back up after this rep, right? You're going to understand better what your limitations are in the stretch. Now, we talk about the unilateral movement. I personally feel that it is more dangerous even than the bilateral movement doing a reflexive rep. Because if I'm doing something like a bicep curl with a barbell, if I'm coming up and I can't get it with one side, I can kind of fight with the other. But if I'm doing something like a seated preacher curl, and I have one area that I can focus on, right? Just this arm. So my biceps doing the work, which is the prime mover. I have the area that's going to hold the resistance, and then I have a wrist joint and an elbow joint in between. And for the sake of a bicep curl, I want to use as much bicep and as little as forearm, shoulder, and joint as possible. The heavier weight that I use, the more forearm is going to be involved regardless. I have to focus on holding it. And at that point, the more of my wrist is involved to stabilize that. So is my elbow. So if I'm doing a reflexive rep and I come down fast, once my muscle's fully elongated, which is when the muscle's fully elongated, it exposes the joint to the most amount of stress. So if I'm coming down and as soon as I open up, I reflexively shoot back up, it's like pouring cold water on someone in a hot shower for your elbow joint. You're just shooting up, which is going to put stress on your elbow, wrist, and bicep more equally than if you were to pause and then allow for the bicep to consciously engage while you come up and squeeze. Right? And that's going to be applied by using a lighter weight so you can appropriately control the eccentric. So when you open up, that weight is going to be appropriate enough for the bicep to come up and take it versus your elbow, wrist, shoulder, bicep, and forearm working as one. Right? Another thing too is once that muscle gets weak and it gets unstable, as you're coming up and this is happening, you're asking for trouble. There's nothing that you can balance off of to get that weight up. If you really fight it and something happens, you can have something snap. So it is way safer to have a lighter weight with a pause where you can just focus on the muscle fatiguing versus bringing that area in that joint to a place where it is highly fatigued. And if something goes wrong as you're coming up, you can potentially injure yourself and have to take months out of it. Last, less joint and connective tissue stress. So if we're using 150-pound dumbbells for 5 reps, we're making 750 pounds of volume and weight moved there. Okay. If we do 100-pound dumbbells for 8 reps, we have 800 pounds of weight moved. The stress on the joint and connective tissue that the 5 are going to have, meaning compression through the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder, is going to be far greater than the 100 for 10, even though we're under a longer period of stress with the hundreds. Why? Well, when you're using the 100-pound dumbbells for 10, the less stabilization you have to use, meaning you can concentrate cognitively more on the concentric and eccentric portion. When you use a heavier weight, you automatically use more stabilizer muscles. There has to be more focus cognitively on the stabilization aspect of it because the weight is heavier. So if you reduce the weight, now not only do we get better mind to muscle connection, but that means that muscle is taking over for more than the joint connective tissue. So even though it's under for a longer period of time during stress, it's stressing the chest, not the joint being the elbow and the wrist. Again, the heavier weight, that's going to induce more stress, even though it's not under the time under tension for as long as period of time. The stress that's pushing the force through the wrist compressing it, right? Elbow compressing it, shoulder compressing it with a heavier weight. Every single time that you think about hypertrophy, you have to think about what's stimulating the muscle and what is best and what is more appropriate for that muscle versus how much weight can I move during this movement. I'll give you a good example. There was a time when I was doing dumbbell seated bicep curls, and I started the phase at 20s, and I think I ended at like 35s. And my form, control, and range of motion all looked the same. I recorded it. And from the side, the fucking speed, everything looked the same from the beginning of the 20s to the 35s. But I felt my biceps better when I was using the 20 and the 25s than the 35s, even though everything looked the same. So I was putting my wrist, my elbow, my shoulder through more stress by progressive overloading and weight when the stimulus felt better at a lighter weight. So essentially, when you're doing an exercise, the weight matters, but to a degree. When you start recruiting more, and I did, like I could feel more of my wrist and my elbow and my shoulder, like the form isn't off, I'm not like swinging my shoulder, but I can feel more tense in the shoulder, more tense in the elbow, more tense in the wrist, rather than having a loose grip of the dumbbell and just feeling the double squeeze, right? So using less weight, I stimulated more muscle and I reduced the joint and connective tissue stress. And again, as people that are working on hypertrophy and building muscle tissue, that's our goal. That's what's going to lead to longer phases without injury. All right, last thing. What are the negatives to pause reps? Less weight being used, resulting in ego checks and not looking as cool for the gram and people at the gym. Because everyone knows how much everyone gives a shit about what we're doing at the gym. Listen, guys, the people at the gym that are performing exercises for Instagram or to impress girls or guys at the gym, I promise you that if you're trying to build a well-built physique, that doing reflexive reps because you don't want to control the weight, because you don't want to use a lighter weight because it doesn't look as cool, if you go down that road and you continue to go down that road, you'll still build muscle, but it will not be optimal. And you'll make 7 years of progress in 2 years or 3 years if you just train the right way. And I can guarantee you, if you use full range of motion with these pauses, you're going to have more efficient rep quality. So fuck what people think. Fuck the setting up the tripods, doing it for Instagram, doing it for social clout. Do it for yourself. If you want to enhance every single part of your training, if you want to make every single session count, the first thing you should think about doing, other than recording and the control range of motion, for this conversation specifically, adding a pause rep to every single exercise that you do. I don't care what it is. Squat, calf raise, bicep curl, fucking lateral raise, lat pull down, pull up, you fucking name it, add a pause in it. I guarantee you that even though the weight's going to come down, you're going to, one, feel the muscle more, and two, you're going to have better quality of training, and you're going to make sure that every single time that you train, you're exposing the most amount of muscle tissue to the most amount of stress. That way, when you recover, you're actually growing. You're not just coming up by, you're looking at your logbook coming up by false data, and then you're wondering why you hit a plateau. So again, really think about your goals when you go to the gym. If you want to optimize your training, enforce pause reps in your hypertrophy training. If you're a powerlifter, strongman, or Olympic weightlifter, again, this does not have anything to do with that style of training. It's A to B. But when it comes to the mechanics of hypertrophy, there is no reason why, if you're trying to build your physique, you are not putting pause reps at every single rep that you do.